Hospital nurse, pregnant after assault by wealthy donor, a billionaire married her and became the father of her baby. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before this story begins, I want to hold your heart in a quiet prayer. As if I were sitting beside you, speaking softly just for you, may love surround you like morning light, warm, constant, and gentle. May every worry begin to melt the moment you hear these words. May your soul be covered in peace so soft, you forget what fear feels like. I pray your heart finds healing where it's been bruised, and your spirit feels held, even if no one else is there to hold you. May something beautiful find you today, because you deserve joy without having to earn it. You are deeply, truly, endlessly loved. Now, my sweet, precious family. This story comes from the deepest part of me. Though you'll hear James speaking today, the words, every single one, are mine. Written through love, through emotion, and with you in mind the entire time. But can I ask something softly? Are these introductions too much for you? I speak this way not to delay, but because I love you. Because I want you to feel safe, seen and wrapped in something kind. And to the beautiful friends joining us for the first time, welcome to this space of love. Please don't click away. Not yet. Give James a chance. Just one story. One moment. If it doesn't feel right to you, you can always let me know. You'll be heard. Always. And family. One thing I ask from my heart. Say a little prayer for me today. Just one. Not because I'm weak, but because your love gives me strength. And please, more than anything, stay for the full story. Don't leave in the middle. This isn't just content, it's a piece of me, written to meet you right where you are. Like this video. Leave a comment, even a single heart. Let me feel your warmth, your presence, your love. Now close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath. And let James begin the journey, a story made with quiet love and written only for you.
When cruelty meets salvation, you disgusting little whore. The words slice through Lisa Evangeline Abbott like a razor blade as Colin McLean's manicured fingers dug viciously into her wrist, his grip calculated to leave bruises that would take weeks to fade. The hospital supply closet felt like a tomb as he pressed her against the cold metal shelving, medical supplies clattering to the sterile linoleum floor around them like broken promises. Did you really think ignoring my texts would make me disappear? His pale blue eyes gleamed with the controlled malice of a predator who had perfected his hunting techniques over decades, his breath carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne that couldn't mask the underlying rot of his character. Did you honestly believe that hiding behind your pathetic colleagues would protect you from honoring our arrangement? Lisa's heart hammered against her ribcage with violent force that threatened to shatter her completely. 3 months and 2 weeks. It had been exactly 3 months and 2 weeks since the hospital Christmas party. 3 months and 2 weeks since this monster had cornered her in the parking garage and stolen everything that mattered from her. 3 months and 2 weeks since her entire world had collapsed into a nightmare that seemed to have no possibility of escape. The secret growing inside her belly felt like a ticking time bomb. At 14 weeks pregnant, she was running out of time to hide what Colin's assault had created. "I don't have any arrangement with you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with the kind of trembling defiance that came from a woman who had already lost everything and was discovering she still possessed the strength to resist. "What you did to me was rape. You have no claim on me." Colin's laugh was pure venom, the sound of a snake preparing to strike with lethal precision. "Oh, but you're catastrophically wrong about that, sweetheart. So very, very wrong. You owe me for the most memorable night of your insignificant little life, and you're going to keep paying until I decide we're even. One way or another." His free hand moved with deliberate cruelty toward her still-concealed belly, and Lisa's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The gesture was subtle enough that security cameras wouldn't detect clear intent, but obvious enough in its implications to make her legs nearly buckle with terror. I wonder what your precious nursing colleagues would say if they knew about your entrepreneurial activities with hospital donors. Colin's voice dropped to the poisonous whisper he had perfected for maximum psychological impact. I wonder how long your sterling reputation would survive if word spread about how you seduce wealthy benefactors in exchange for career advancement and cash payments. The threat hung in the air like toxic gas, choking off Lisa's ability to breathe normally. She understood exactly what he meant. Colin McLean would systematically destroy her career, her reputation, everything she had worked 14 years to build since graduating nursing school with honors. He would paint her as nothing more than a calculating prostitute who traded her body for money and professional favors, and who would believe the word of a young black nurse from the economically disadvantaged side of town over a wealthy white philanthropist who had donated over $50 million to children's hospitals across 4 states. "Please," she breathed, the word torn from her throat like a confession extracted under torture. She hated herself for begging, despised the weakness that desperation had carved into her bones, but the alternative was complete annihilation. "Please just leave me alone. I'll never report what happened. I'll never tell anyone. Just, please let me try to move forward with my life." "Leave you alone?" Colin's grip tightened until Lisa gasped with pain, his fingernails drawing tiny crescents of blood where they pressed into her dark skin. "After you've been playing the wounded innocent for months? After you've been parading around this hospital like some kind of untouchable saint, acting like what we shared together was something dirty instead of the privilege it actually was?" His voice dropped to that same poisonous whisper, each word calculated to inflict maximum psychological damage while maintaining plausible deniability if anyone happened to overhear. "You became mine the moment you got in my car that night, Lisa, and if you don't start remembering that fundamental fact, I'll make sure everyone in this hospital understands exactly what kind of woman you really are. The kind who seduces married donors in parking garages and then cries rape when she doesn't receive the financial compensation she was expecting." The lies fell from his lips with the practiced ease of a man who had perfected this psychological warfare over years of systematically destroying vulnerable women. Each word was designed to make Lisa question her own memory, her own worth, her own right to call what had happened to her by its real name. He released her so suddenly that she stumbled backward, her green scrubs catching on the sharp edge of a supply cart and tearing slightly. As Colin straightened his $1,000 suit jacket with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced meaningful consequences for his actions, his smile was pure malevolence wrapped in expensive dental work. "Oh, and Lisa." He paused at the supply closet door, his voice carrying that same false charm he employed with hospital administrators and charity board members. "I trust you'll be more responsive to my communications going forward. It would be unfortunate if I had to escalate my efforts to gain your attention, particularly given your current, delicate condition." The door slammed shut with the finality of a prison cell, leaving Lisa alone in the suffocating darkness with only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the devastating certainty that Colin McLean knew about her pregnancy. Somehow, this monster who had already stolen her innocence, her sense of safety, her ability to sleep through the night without nightmares, had also discovered the one secret that could bind her to him forever. 30 minutes later, Lisa forced herself to emerge from the supply closet and return to the hospital floor, her professional mask carefully reconstructed despite the earthquake of terror still shaking her foundation. She had patients depending on her, responsibilities that couldn't wait for her personal hell to resolve itself into something manageable. But as she approached the bustling nurses' station, trying to blend back into the rhythm of life-saving work that had once given her purpose, she realized her nightmare was about to evolve into something even more complex. "Abbott!" Charge Nurse Margaret Williams called out with the kind of sharp authority that made even veteran doctors straighten their spines. "Trauma Bay 3 stat. Multi-vehicle construction accident coming in hot. Architect caught in scaffolding collapse. Multiple injuries. Possible internal bleeding. This is going to be extremely complicated, so I need your absolute best work." Lisa's medical training engaged with the automatic precision of a woman who had spent 10 years in emergency nursing, her personal anguish temporarily shelved in favor of the adrenaline-fueled focus required to save lives. She grabbed supplies with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through familiar motions that provided a momentary anchor in the storm of her existence. But as the ambulance doors burst open with their cargo of sirens and shouted medical terminology as the paramedics wheeled in their patient through the controlled chaos of emergency medicine, something extraordinary happened that would alter the trajectory of Lisa's entire life. Through the clinical urgency of trauma medicine, through the professional distance she maintained between herself and the broken bodies she worked to heal, Lisa found herself looking into the most beautiful pair of dark brown eyes she had ever encountered. Eyes that somehow, impossibly, seemed to see straight through the walls she had built around her shattered soul. Hector Alejandro Gonzalez was conscious despite his significant injuries, a dislocated shoulder that had been roughly reset by paramedics, several broken ribs that made breathing an exercise in controlled agony, and a deep gash across his forehead that would require precise stitching to avoid permanent scarring. But what struck Lisa with unexpected force wasn't the catalog of his physical trauma. It was the way he looked at her as she approached his gurney, as if he could sense the invisible wounds she carried like a second skeleton beneath her skin. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with pain but carrying an undertone of warmth that Lisa hadn't heard directed toward her in months. The simple question, asked with genuine interest rather than medical necessity, caught her completely off guard. "Lisa," she replied automatically, then caught herself falling into the kind of personal interaction she had been carefully avoiding since Colin's assault. "Nurse Abbott, I need to assess your injuries, Mr. Gonzalez. Hector Gonzalez." His slight accent carried the musical cadences of someone who had learned English as a second language, but spoke it with complete fluency and confidence. "Lisa, that's a beautiful name. It suits you perfectly." As Lisa began her systematic examination, checking pulse and blood pressure with the gentle efficiency that had earned her recognition as one of the hospital's most skilled emergency nurses, she found herself drawn into an unexpected awareness of this man as more than just another trauma case requiring medical intervention. Her hands moved with practiced competence as she cleaned the blood from his forehead wound, but Hector seemed to notice details that other patients missed entirely in their pain and confusion. "Someone's been hurting you, haven't they?" he said quietly, his words so unexpected that Lisa's hands stilled completely on the bandage she was applying. The simple question, asked with such gentle certainty and complete absence of judgment, nearly shattered what remained of Lisa's carefully maintained composure. For 3 months and 2 weeks, she had carried her secret alone, building walls around her pain until she felt like she was suffocating behind barriers of her own construction. But something about this stranger's voice, about the compassion radiating from his dark eyes despite his own obvious physical suffering, made those walls develop the first cracks they had shown since that terrible December night. I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her completely, carrying all the weight of trauma she had been trying so desperately to hide from the world. Hector studied her face with the same intensity he brought to architectural blueprints, seeing beyond the surface presentation to the structural damage hidden underneath. "No," he said softly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. You're not fine. You're scared. You're carrying something that's eating you alive from the inside out, and you're doing it all alone. Lisa's breath caught in her throat like a bird trapped in a cage. How could this man, this complete stranger bleeding on a trauma bay gurney, see so clearly what she had been hiding from everyone else in her professional and personal life? How could he look at her with such understanding when she felt so completely broken and worthless? I need to finish your treatment, she managed, forcing herself to focus on cleaning his wounds rather than the way his words seemed to reach inside her chest and touch something she thought had died 3 months ago. But as she worked, Hector continued to watch her with those impossibly perceptive eyes. When she winced slightly while reaching for supplies, a reflexive response to the bruises Colin's grip had left on her wrist, he noticed. When she unconsciously placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach during a moment of nausea, he saw that too. And when Colin McLean's voice echoed from the hallway outside the trauma bay, making Lisa's entire body tense with primal fear, Hector's jaw tightened with a kind of protective fury that took her breath away. Whatever you're carrying alone, he said as Lisa prepared to move to her next patient, his hand gently catching hers before she could pull completely away. You don't have to anymore. The touch was electric, sending warmth through Lisa's entire nervous system in a way she hadn't experienced since before that terrible December night. For just a moment, looking into Hector Gonzalez's eyes and feeling the strength in his calloused fingers, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, possibly, there might be a way out of the darkness that had consumed her life. But then Colin's distinctive laughter drifted through the trauma bay doors like the sound of approaching thunder, and reality crashed back over her like a tsunami of terror and despair. She was pregnant with a monster's child, trapped in a web of threats and lies, with nowhere to run and no one powerful enough to stand between her and the man who had already destroyed everything she thought she knew about safety and trust. Or was she? As Lisa walked away from Hector's bedside, she could feel his eyes following her with the weight of a promise she didn't yet understand. For the first time in 3 months and 2 weeks, the tiny ember of hope she thought had been extinguished completely began to stir back to life in the ashes of her broken world. Neither of them knew it yet, but their meeting would become the first chapter in a love story powerful enough to wage war against the darkest kind of evil, and ultimately triumph. Sometimes salvation arrived in the most unexpected places, carried in the gentle hands of a stranger who could see beauty in broken things and possessed the courage to fight for what deserved protection. Love was about to challenge cruelty for dominance over Lisa Evangeline Abbott's future, and the battle lines were already being drawn in the space between one heartbeat and the next. But this time, unlike every battle she had fought since December, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Chapter 2. Guardian Angel. Love's first protection. Hector Alejandro Gonzalez couldn't silence the questions that had haunted him for the past 2 weeks. 14 days had passed since his discharge from St. Mary's Hospital. 14 days of following doctors' orders to rest and recover from injuries that had healed faster than expected, thanks to his construction-hardened constitution and excellent medical care. But instead of focusing on his architectural projects, Hector found himself returning to the hospital every few days, carrying modest bouquets of flowers, while telling himself he was simply expressing ongoing gratitude to the medical staff who had provided exceptional care. The truth was far more complex and consuming. He couldn't forget Lisa Abbott, couldn't erase the memory of how her hands had trembled despite her professional competence, couldn't stop replaying the moment when bone-deep terror had flashed in her dark eyes at the sound of a man's voice from the corridor, couldn't shake the absolute certainty that someone was systematically destroying the most courageous woman he had ever encountered. Hector had built his architectural empire by developing an ability to read structural weaknesses and human behavior with equal precision. He could identify compromised foundations, hidden damage, and potential points of catastrophic failure by observing details that others dismissed as insignificant. And everything about Lisa Abbott's carefully controlled demeanor suggested a woman whose foundation was cracking under pressures that no one else seemed willing or able to acknowledge. Over the past 2 weeks, he had made discreet inquiries, nothing invasive or inappropriate, just careful observations during his brief hospital visits and conversations with staff members who knew Lisa professionally. What he learned painted a picture of a nurse whose behavior had changed dramatically about 4 months ago, who had gone from being socially engaged with colleagues to withdrawing into herself, who flinched at unexpected sounds and maintained hypervigilant awareness of her surroundings even while performing complex medical procedures. This particular Thursday afternoon, Hector arrived at the hospital during the shift change, timing his visit to observe the daily rhythms without appearing to stalk or surveil anyone. What he witnessed from his position in the family waiting area made his protective instincts flare with dangerous intensity. From his vantage point near the information desk, Hector watched as Colin McLean, a name he recognized from hospital donor plaques and society page photographs, approached Lisa at the central nurses' station. Even from a distance, Hector could observe the immediate change in Lisa's body language. Her shoulders drew inward as if preparing for physical impact. Her breathing became shallow and controlled, and she stepped backward instinctively until she was pressed against the medication cart, with nowhere left to retreat. Colin's behavior was sophisticated in its cruelty. He maintained appropriate physical distance and kept his voice low enough that casual observers would see nothing more than a donor having a routine conversation with staff. But Hector's construction site experience had taught him to read body language and spatial dynamics, and everything about the interaction screamed predator and prey. While Hector couldn't hear the specific words being exchanged, he could observe Colin's subtle but unmistakable dominance displays. The way he positioned himself to block Lisa's escape routes, how he leaned in just close enough to make her uncomfortable without appearing inappropriate to observers, the calculated smile that never reached his pale eyes. Lisa's responses were equally telling. The protective way her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, the way she kept glancing toward other staff members as if hoping for intervention, the defeated slope of her shoulders when Colin finally walked away with obvious satisfaction. The interaction lasted less than 3 minutes, but it provided Hector with enough information to understand that Lisa Abbott was being systematically terrorized by someone with enough social standing to make open confrontation impossible. That evening, Hector began the kind of careful research that had made him successful in business. Methodical, thorough, and designed to uncover information without alerting his target. Colin McLean's public profile was impressive: successful medical equipment supplier, major hospital donor, board member of multiple charitable foundations. But Hector's business connections allowed him to dig deeper into the man's professional history and personal reputation. What he discovered over the following week was disturbing but not immediately actionable. Whispered rumors about Colin's interest in younger female staff members, strategic donations that seemed to coincide with the quiet departure of certain employees, and a pattern of settlements with former staff members who had signed comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The breakthrough came 10 days after Hector began his investigation, when he witnessed Colin's next interaction with Lisa. Hector had positioned himself in the hospital cafe with clear sight lines to the parking garage exit, knowing from observation that Lisa typically finished her shifts around 7:30. What he saw confirmed his worst suspicions about the power dynamic involved. Colin intercepted Lisa near her modest sedan, timing his approach for maximum isolation. From his position behind a concrete pillar, Hector could hear fragments of the conversation that revealed the true nature of Colin's control over Lisa. "Thinking about our conversation last week." Colin's voice carried the false warmth he used in public settings. Hope you've had time to reconsider your attitude toward our ongoing relationship. Lisa's response was barely audible, but her body language spoke volumes about her fear and exhaustion. Please, Colin. I'm trying to do my job and move forward with my life. Can't you just leave me alone? Leave you alone? Colin's laugh contained no warmth whatsoever. After everything we've shared? After the connection we've established? I don't think so, Lisa. Some relationships create permanent obligations. That's when Hector witnessed something that made his vision blur with protective rage. The deliberate way Colin stepped closer to Lisa, forcing her against her car door, and the way her hand moved instinctively to protect her stomach in a gesture that suggested pregnancy. The pieces of Lisa's nightmare clicked together with devastating clarity. Colin McLean hadn't just harassed Lisa, he had assaulted her, impregnated her, and was now using both the trauma and the pregnancy as weapons to maintain psychological control. But Hector also understood that wealthy predators like Colin required careful handling. Direct confrontation without proper preparation could escalate the situation and put Lisa in greater danger. "Excuse me," Hector said, approaching from the parking garage entrance with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. "I think I'm lost. Could you help me find the visitor's elevator?" His interruption was perfectly timed and completely plausible, a construction accident victim returning for a follow-up appointment who had genuinely gotten turned around in the parking structure. But his presence immediately changed the dynamic of the situation. Colin's predatory smile faltered as he recognized Hector from recent newspaper coverage of major architectural projects. "Mr. Gonzalez. What an unexpected encounter." "Mr. McLean," Hector replied with careful neutrality, positioning himself so that Lisa was no longer trapped between Colin and her car. "I didn't realize you were personally involved in day-to-day hospital operations." The subtle challenge in Hector's tone wasn't lost on Colin, whose pale eyes narrowed as he reassessed the situation. Lisa used the moment of distraction to unlock her car door and create some distance from Colin's intimidating presence. "Just ensuring that our charitable investments are being properly managed," Colin replied with the smooth deflection he had perfected over years of similar situations. "I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining high standards." "Absolutely," Hector agreed, his voice carrying undertones that suggested he understood more than Colin might be comfortable with. "Standards matter tremendously, especially when it comes to protecting those who serve our community." The brief exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but it accomplished several important objectives. Colin understood that Lisa now had a witness to his behavior. Lisa realized that someone was willing to intervene on her behalf, and Hector confirmed his suspicions about the predatory relationship he had observed. As Colin departed with obvious reluctance, Lisa stood beside her car looking like someone who had just experienced a reprieve from execution. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying exhaustion and gratitude in equal measure. "Are you safe driving home?" Hector asked, genuinely concerned about her emotional state. "I think so," Lisa replied, though her hands were still trembling as she held her car keys. I need to get away from here." "Lisa," Hector said gently, using her first name for the first time since they'd met in the trauma bay. "If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who's not connected to the hospital or other complications in your life, I'd be honored to listen." He handed her a business card with his direct phone number written on the back. "No pressure, no expectations, just someone who recognizes courage when he sees it and thinks you shouldn't have to face whatever you're dealing with alone." Lisa stared at the card for a long moment, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone was offering help without demanding something in return. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want to get involved in something like this?" "Because 15 years ago I watched my sister go through something similar," Hector replied with the honesty that would become the foundation of their relationship. And I learned that sometimes the difference between survival and destruction is having one person who believes you and is willing to stand beside you. As Lisa drove away that evening, Hector's business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 months, the possibility that she might not have to face her nightmare alone. And Hector, watching her tail lights disappear into traffic, made a silent promise to the universe that if Lisa Abbott chose to trust him with her truth, he would do everything in his power to help her reclaim her life from whatever monster was terrorizing her. Their connection was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was real. And sometimes real was enough to begin building something strong enough to withstand any storm that threatened to tear it apart. The war for Lisa's freedom hadn't begun yet, but the first alliance had been formed, and alliances, Hector knew from experience, were the foundation upon which every victory was built. Chapter 3. Claiming What's Sacred. The Vow That Changes Everything. For 3 days after the parking garage encounter, Lisa carried Hector's business card in her scrubs pocket, like a talisman she wasn't sure she had the courage to use. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its physical size, a small piece of cardstock that represented the possibility of hope in a world that had become increasingly hopeless. She had researched him, of course. Google searches during her breaks revealed an impressive professional portfolio. Gonzalez and Associates had designed some of the city's most beautiful buildings. Hector himself had won numerous architectural awards, and his company was known for creating affordable housing projects that actually served the communities they were built in. More importantly, there were no scandal rumors, no whispered stories about inappropriate behavior with female employees or business partners. But Lisa had learned the hard way that professional success and public reputation could hide terrible secrets. The decision to call came on a Sunday evening, after another weekend of jumping at every sound, checking door locks obsessively, and staring at pregnancy test confirmations that she had taken multiple times because the reality still seemed impossible to accept. 14 weeks and 3 days pregnant. The timing made denial impossible, and her body was beginning to show changes that loose clothing could only hide for so long. When her phone rang at 9:15 that evening, Lisa almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number. But something, intuition, desperation, or simple curiosity, made her accept the call. "Lisa, this is Hector Gonzalez. I hope I'm not calling too late." His voice carried the same warmth she remembered from their hospital encounters, but there was an underlying current of concern that suggested he had been thinking about her situation as much as she had been thinking about his offer. "How did you get my number?" she asked, though her tone carried more curiosity than accusation. "Hospital directory. I told them I wanted to send a thank you note to the nurse who had provided exceptional care during my emergency treatment," Hector replied with complete honesty, which was entirely true, by the way. Lisa found herself smiling for the first time in days. "You could have just sent the note." "I could have," he agreed. "But I kept thinking about our conversation in the parking garage, and I wanted you to know that my offer to listen was sincere. No agenda, no expectations, just availability." "Why?" The question emerged before Lisa could stop herself. "Why would you want to get involved in someone else's problems? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Hector said quietly. "I know you're brave enough to continue working and helping people even when you're clearly dealing with something that terrifies you. I know you're strong enough to maintain your professional standards while facing whatever personal hell you're navigating. And I know that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who need support the most." There was something in his voice, a combination of genuine concern and patient strength, that made Lisa's carefully constructed walls develop hairline cracks. "If I told you that my problems were more complicated than you could possibly imagine," she said carefully, "would you still be offering to listen?" Especially then, Hector replied without hesitation. Complicated problems usually require complicated solutions, and complicated solutions work better when you have someone helping you think them through. Lisa closed her eyes, weighing the risks of trust against the crushing weight of isolation she had been carrying for 4 months. "There's a coffee shop across from the hospital," she said finally. "Cafe Luna. If you really meant what you said about listening, would you meet me there tomorrow evening, after my shift?" "I'll be there," Hector promised. "And Lisa, thank you for trusting me enough to take this step." After they hung up, Lisa sat in her small apartment and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or the first smart decision she had made since December. The next evening, Cafe Luna was nearly empty except for a few medical residents grabbing late-night caffeine and a couple of insomniacs seeking refuge from their own sleepless demons. Lisa arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner booth that offered privacy, while still providing clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. Habits born of 4 months of hypervigilance. Hector arrived exactly on time, and Lisa noticed immediately that he had dressed carefully, but not formally. Clean jeans, a button-down shirt, no jewelry or accessories that might seem intimidating. Everything about his appearance suggested someone who had given thought to making her comfortable. "Thank you for coming," he said as he settled into the booth across from her, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Herbal tea," Lisa replied automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, chamomile tea. Caffeine makes me anxious these days." Hector didn't comment on the admission, but Lisa noticed the way his eyes registered the information with the kind of careful attention that suggested he understood the significance of such details. When he returned with her tea and his own coffee, Lisa found herself studying his face in the warm cafe lighting. He was handsome in an understated way. Strong features, intelligent dark eyes, calloused hands that spoke of someone who worked with tools as well as blueprints. But more importantly, there was something fundamentally decent about him that Lisa's trauma-sharpened instincts couldn't detect any deception in. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her hands wrapped around the warm mug like an anchor. "Start wherever feels safe," Hector replied with infinite patience. "I meant what I said. No pressure, no timeline, no expectations. Just someone willing to listen for as long as you need to talk." Lisa studied his face for signs of impatience or hidden agendas, finding only genuine compassion and something deeper, a protective instinct that seemed completely focused on her well-being rather than his own interests. "4 months ago, I thought I knew who I was," she began slowly, her voice gaining strength as she forced herself to speak words she had never voiced aloud. "I was a good nurse, a responsible person, someone who made smart decisions and avoided dangerous situations. I had never been the kind of woman who ended up in the situations you read about in the news." Hector waited without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on her face with complete attention. "The hospital Christmas party," Lisa continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Colin McLean offered to drive me home. He's wealthy, respected, generous with his charitable donations. Everyone likes him, trusts him. And I thought he was just being a gentleman." The words came easier once she started, as if a dam had burst somewhere deep inside her chest. She told Hector about Colin's months of subtle pursuit, about her attempts to maintain professional boundaries, about the false sense of security that had led her to accept a ride home from a man she had trusted because of his public reputation. "He didn't drive me home," Lisa whispered, her hands trembling around her tea mug. "He drove to the parking garage behind the hospital, and when I tried to get out of the car—" "He raped you," Hector said quietly, his voice carrying no judgment, only acknowledgement of a terrible truth. "Yes." The word emerged as barely a breath, but it carried the weight of 4 months of silence and shame. Hector's hands clenched into fists on the table, his jaw tightening with controlled rage, but his voice remained gentle when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said with absolute sincerity. "I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry you've been carrying it alone." "There's more," Lisa said, her hand moving unconsciously to her abdomen. "I'm pregnant, 14 weeks. The timing. There's no question about who the father is." The silence that followed felt enormous, filled with the weight of truth that could change everything between them. Lisa watched Hector's face carefully, preparing herself for disgust, rejection, or the kind of pity that felt like another form of violation. Instead, she saw something that took her breath away, a deepening of the protective fury in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like determination. "What does he want from you now?" Hector asked, his voice carrying the controlled precision of someone who understood that information was the first step toward solutions. "Compliance," Lisa replied, grateful that he hadn't immediately focused on the pregnancy, but rather on the ongoing threat. "He wants me to be available to him. He says if I cooperate, he'll take care of me financially. If you don't, he'll destroy your reputation and claim you're lying about the assault," Hector finished, demonstrating an understanding of predatory behavior that suggested he had encountered it before. "Yes, and now that there's going to be a baby," Lisa's voice broke completely. "He says he has permanent rights to be in my life, that no matter what I do, he'll always have a connection to me through the child." "He's wrong," Hector said with quiet intensity. "Biology doesn't create rights when it's the result of violence, and there are ways to protect both you and your baby from him." "How can you possibly know that?" Lisa whispered. "How can you be so certain when you don't understand how powerful he is, how much influence he has?" "Because I've seen women survive situations like this before," Hector replied, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "Because there are legal protections available when you have the right support and resources, and because you're not going to face this alone anymore." Lisa stared at him, searching his face for signs that he didn't fully understand what he was offering to take on. "Hector, you don't know what you're saying. This isn't just about supporting someone through a difficult time. This is about taking on a wealthy, connected man who has spent months demonstrating that he's willing to destroy anyone who opposes him. And the baby is innocent," Hector said firmly. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you make sure that innocence is protected." "What does that mean?" Lisa asked, though something in her heart was already beginning to hope. "It means that if you choose to keep this pregnancy, you won't be doing it alone," Hector replied with the same certainty he brought to architectural planning. "It means that Colin McLean won't be the only man with resources and connections involved in this situation. And it means that your baby will have someone willing to love and protect them regardless of how they were conceived." The offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Lisa had expected many possible responses to her story, but this offer of partnership, protection, and unconditional support had never entered her imagination. "You would do that?" she whispered. "You would take responsibility for a child that isn't yours. Help me fight a man who could make both our lives hell." "Lisa," Hector said gently, reaching across the table to cover her hands with his, "I've been waiting my entire life to find someone worth fighting for. If you'll let me, I'd like to start with you and this baby." For the first time in 4 months, Lisa felt hope unfurl in her chest, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real, and sometimes real was enough to begin building something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed. "I don't even know your favorite color," she said through tears that felt like relief. "Blue," Hector replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. "The same blue as your scrubs, the color I've been seeing in my dreams since the day we met. And in that coffee shop, surrounded by the gentle murmur of other people's ordinary conversations, Lisa Evangeline Abbott made the first brave decision she had made since December. She chose to trust the man who was offering her a future she had never dared imagine might be possible. Their love story was just beginning, but already it was proving strong enough to challenge the darkness that had threatened to consume her completely. Chapter 4. Legal Fortress, Building Protection. The law offices of Blackstone, Martinez and Associates occupied the entire 32nd floor of downtown's most prestigious high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city that Hector had helped design over 15 years of architectural practice. But this Tuesday morning, 3 days after Lisa's coffee shop revelation, Hector's attention was focused entirely on constructing the legal foundation that would protect both Lisa and her unborn child from Colin McLean's systematic campaign of psychological terrorism. "I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided," Elena Martinez said, her manicured fingers tapping against a legal pad filled with detailed notes from their initial consultation. "What we're dealing with is complex but not insurmountable. However, I need you both to understand that building effective legal protection against someone with Colin McLean's resources and connections will take time, patience, and strategic planning." Lisa, now 15 weeks pregnant and showing the first visible signs of her condition beneath loose clothing, sat beside Hector in Elena's conference room. Her hand rested in his, a gesture that had become natural over their 3 meetings this week, as if physical contact helped ground them both during difficult conversations. "What's the first step?" Hector asked, his voice carrying the focused intensity he brought to all construction projects where lives and safety were at stake. "Documentation and evidence gathering," Elena replied with the precision of someone who had spent 2 decades fighting wealthy predators through the legal system. "We need to create a comprehensive record of Colin's harassment pattern before we can pursue restraining orders or criminal charges. This process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks if we want the documentation to be legally bulletproof." 4 to 6 weeks? Lisa's voice carried anxiety that had nothing to do with impatience. "What if he escalates his behavior during that time? What if he figures out what we're doing?" "We implement immediate safety protocols while building the legal case," Elena explained, opening a thick folder that contained preliminary research her associates had already begun. "Private security for Lisa, documentation of all future contact attempts, and strategic legal warnings that put Colin on notice without revealing our full strategy." Elena spread several documents across the conference table, each representing a different aspect of their defensive strategy. "First, we file for a temporary personal protection order based on workplace harassment," she continued. "This isn't as comprehensive as a full restraining order, but it establishes legal precedent and creates official documentation. The process takes approximately 2 weeks if we expedite." "What about the pregnancy?" Lisa asked, her free hand moving unconsciously to her belly. "How does that affect our legal options?" "Significantly," Elena replied with a grimness that suggested she had handled similar cases before. "If Colin becomes aware of the pregnancy, before we have solid legal protections in place, he could file for paternal rights that would be very difficult to challenge later. We need to be extremely strategic about timing." Hector's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "What kind of paternal rights?" "Legally, biological fathers have standing to claim custody, visitation, and decision-making authority even when the pregnancy resulted from rape," Elena explained with the blunt honesty that made her one of the state's most respected family law attorneys. "However, there are precedents for terminating those rights when the father has demonstrated unfitness through criminal behavior. So we need to prove he's unfit before he knows about the pregnancy," Lisa said, her analytical mind grasping the strategic implications despite her emotional stress. "Exactly. Which brings us to the investigation component," Elena continued, opening another file that contained preliminary research results. I've hired a private investigation firm that specializes in uncovering patterns of predatory behavior by wealthy individuals. Their initial findings are illuminating. She handed them a summary report that made Hector's hands clench into fists. 3 other women have come forward privately to discuss their experiences with Colin McLean over the past 12 years, Elena continued. 2 were hospital employees. 1 was a pharmaceutical sales representative. All 3 incidents involved sexual assault, financial coercion, and comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. They're willing to testify? Lisa asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. Eventually, yes. But building that testimony into admissible evidence will take time. Each woman will need legal representation to safely break their NDAs, which involves complex negotiations with Colin's legal team. Elena leaned forward, her expression serious. Lisa, I need you to understand something crucial. What we're building here isn't just a restraining order or a harassment case. We're constructing a comprehensive legal fortress designed to protect you and your child permanently. But fortresses take time to build properly. How much time? Hector asked, already calculating timelines and potential complications. 6 months minimum for a solid criminal case that could result in conviction and permanent termination of parental rights, Elena replied. 3 months for strong enough civil protections to prevent immediate threats. But we can implement emergency measures starting immediately. She handed Hector a business card. This is Liam Rodriguez, the best personal security specialist in the city. I've already briefed him on your situation. He can have protection in place for Lisa within 24 hours. Is that really necessary? Lisa asked, though her question carried more concern about expense than safety. It's absolutely necessary, Elena replied firmly. Men like Colin McLean often escalate their behavior when they sense their control slipping. The fact that he's been monitoring you closely enough to time his approaches suggests surveillance capabilities that require professional countermeasures. Over the next hour, Elena outlined a comprehensive strategy that resembled military campaign planning more than traditional legal procedure. Private investigators would document Colin's movements and communications. Security specialists would protect Lisa while gathering evidence of stalking behavior, and legal teams would prepare multiple types of charges and protective orders for strategic deployment. The costs, Lisa began, but Hector interrupted gently. Are not your concern, he said firmly. This is an investment in our future and our family's safety. Our family, Lisa asked, the words carrying wonder and uncertainty in equal measure. If you'll have me, Hector replied, his voice carrying the same certainty he brought to architectural planning. I know this situation isn't traditional, and I know you need time to process everything that's happening. But I want you to know that my commitment to protecting you and this baby isn't conditional on anything except your willingness to let me help. Elena observed their interaction with the experienced eye of someone who had seen many relationships tested by legal crises. I should mention that if you two were to marry before the baby is born, it would significantly strengthen your legal position regarding parental rights. Marriage? Lisa's voice carried surprise and something that might have been longing. Married partners have stronger legal standing in custody disputes, Elena explained. And if Hector were to legally adopt the child immediately after birth, it would make any challenge from Colin much more difficult. We don't have to make any decisions about that right now, Hector said quickly, seeing the overwhelm in Lisa's expression. We focus on keeping you safe first. Everything else can wait until you're ready. But even as he spoke the words, Hector was already imagining a future where Lisa wore his ring and their child carried his name. Not because of legal strategy, but because somewhere in the past week, his feelings had evolved from protective instinct into something much deeper and more permanent. That evening, as they left Elena's office with a detailed action plan and a list of immediate security measures, Lisa felt simultaneously more hopeful and more terrified than she had since learning about her pregnancy. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Hector as they walked toward his truck. "About taking on all of this complexity and danger? Because once we start implementing Elena's plan, there's no going back to simple solutions." "Lisa," Hector said, stopping to face her directly, "I haven't been sure about many things in my life, but I'm absolutely certain that you and this baby deserve to be protected from Colin McLean, and I'm certain that I want to be the man who provides that protection." "Even though we've only known each other for 3 weeks?" Lisa asked, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her despite her growing trust in him. "Especially because of how much you've trusted me in 3 weeks," Hector replied. "Trust like that doesn't happen by accident, Lisa. It happens because two people recognize something in each other that's worth fighting for." As they drove toward Lisa's apartment, where Liam Rodriguez's security team would meet them to begin implementing protection protocols, Lisa found herself believing that maybe, possibly, the nightmare that had consumed her life for 4 months might finally be approaching its end. The legal war against Colin McLean was just beginning, but for the first time since December, Lisa felt like she might actually have a chance of winning. And winning, she was beginning to understand, might mean more than just defeating her rapist. It might mean building something beautiful and permanent with the man who had looked at her most broken pieces and decided they were worth defending with everything he possessed. Their foundation was being constructed one legal document at a time, and foundations built properly were designed to last forever. Chapter 5. Fortress Under Siege. Escalating Danger. The first sign that Colin McLean was adapting his strategy came exactly 1 week after Lisa began working with Elena Martinez's legal team. Instead of his usual direct approaches at the hospital, Colin began employing the kind of sophisticated psychological warfare that wealthy predators used when they sensed their control mechanisms were being challenged. Lisa discovered the escalation when she arrived at work on a Thursday morning to find a stunning bouquet of white roses at the nurse's station, addressed to her with a card that read simply, "Thinking of our future together. A friend who cares about your well-being." The message was perfectly calculated, romantic enough to seem like a gesture from a secret admirer to casual observers, but threatening enough in its implications to send ice water through Lisa's veins. Colin was demonstrating that he could reach her anywhere, anytime, while maintaining complete plausible deniability. "Security protocols are working exactly as intended," Liam Rodriguez explained when Lisa called to report the incident. "He's being forced to operate more subtly, which means he's leaving less obvious evidence, but also limiting his ability to escalate physically. We document everything and use it to build the pattern of harassment." But Colin's sophisticated approach extended beyond symbolic gestures. Over the following 2 weeks, Lisa noticed that her usual parking space was frequently occupied by expensive cars that forced her to park farther from the hospital entrance. Her favorite lunch spot began receiving anonymous complaints about food safety that resulted in temporary closures. The coffee shop where she and Hector had their first real conversation was suddenly featured in negative online reviews that mentioned unprofessional staff who gossip about customers. Each incident was individually minor and legally unprovable, but collectively they created a pattern of disruption designed to remind Lisa that Colin's influence extended into every aspect of her daily life. "He's testing boundaries and gathering intelligence," Elena Martinez explained during their weekly strategy meeting. "This behavior is actually good news for our case. It demonstrates systematic harassment while giving us opportunities to document his methods." "It doesn't feel like good news," Lisa replied, her hand moving protectively to her belly, where their baby was now noticeably active at 17 weeks pregnant. "It feels like being slowly strangled." "Which is exactly the psychological effect he's trying to achieve," Hector said grimly, his arm tightening around Lisa's shoulders as they sat in Elena's conference room. But we're not playing his game by his rules anymore. The breakthrough in their defensive strategy came when Liam Rodriguez's surveillance team documented Colin's most significant tactical error. He had hired his own private investigation firm to gather information about Lisa and Hector's relationship. Corporate espionage is a serious crime when it involves harassment victims, Elena explained with satisfaction as she reviewed the evidence Liam had compiled. Colin's investigators have been photographing Lisa's medical appointments, documenting her daily routines, and attempting to access her employment records. This gives us grounds for criminal charges that could result in immediate arrest. Finally, Hector said with the grim satisfaction of someone who had been waiting months to strike back at their tormentor. But Elena held up a cautionary hand. We don't want to arrest Colin yet. We want to use his surveillance activities to build an ironclad case that will result in conviction and permanent restraining orders. That means we let him continue gathering evidence while we document his criminal behavior. How much longer? Lisa asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. The stress of constant hypervigilance was taking a toll that went beyond normal pregnancy fatigue. 2 more weeks maximum, Elena promised. We're almost ready to spring the trap. That evening, as Lisa and Hector worked together in his kitchen, their domestic routines had become naturally synchronized over the past month, Lisa finally voiced the question that had been building in her mind. What happens after we defeat Colin? She asked, setting down her knife and turning to face Hector. What happens to us when we don't have this crisis, binding us together? Hector stopped chopping vegetables and gave her his complete attention. What do you mean? I mean that everything between us has been built around protecting me and the baby from Colin, Lisa said, her voice carrying vulnerability that she had been afraid to express. What if, when that threat is gone, you realize that's all this was? What if you wake up one day and understand that you got involved with a pregnant woman and her problems out of some kind of rescue fantasy? Hector set down his own knife and moved to stand directly in front of her, his hands gently framing her face. Lisa, he said with the same certainty he brought to architectural planning, I need you to understand something very clearly. Yes, I wanted to protect you from Colin. Yes, I was motivated by seeing someone I cared about being terrorized. But that's not why I'm here anymore. Then why? She whispered. Because somewhere in the past month, protecting you became loving you, Hector replied, his voice carrying wonder at his own realization. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you slept well. Because when you smile, it feels like sunshine breaking through clouds. Because when I feel the baby move, I think that's my daughter, not because of legal documents or adoption papers, but because my heart has already claimed both of you. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Hector ... I'm in love with you, he continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth. Not with the situation, not with the idea of being your protector, but with you, with your courage, your compassion, your strength, the way you make terrible hospital coffee taste better just by sharing it with me. I'm in love with the family we're building together. The baby isn't yours, Lisa said softly, voicing the fear that had been eating at her despite all his reassurances. She is mine, Hector replied with fierce conviction, his hand moving to rest on Lisa's rounded belly where their daughter was performing her evening gymnastics. She's been mine since the first time I felt her kick. She's mine because I love her mother, and I choose to love her, and love is what creates family, not genetics. As if responding to her father's voice, the baby moved energetically beneath his palm, making both Lisa and Hector smile through their emotional conversation. I love you too, Lisa said, the words emerging from the deepest part of her healing heart. I was so afraid to admit it because everything in my life has been about survival for so long. But somewhere between the legal meetings and the security protocols and you holding my hand through every crisis, I fell completely in love with you. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of Hector's secure phone, the device Liam had given him for emergency communications. "Rodriguez here," Liam's voice carried urgent tension. "Colin just made his biggest mistake yet. He attempted to bribe a hospital administrator for access to Lisa's medical records, specifically her pregnancy information. We have recordings, witnesses, and documentation of felony attempted bribery." Hector's jaw tightened with anticipation. "What does this mean for our timeline?" "It means Elena can file criminal charges tomorrow morning," Liam replied with satisfaction. "Colin McLean's campaign of terror just became a prosecutable crime with serious jail time attached." As Hector relayed the conversation to Lisa, she felt a mixture of relief and anxiety that had become her constant emotional state. "It's really going to be over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare might finally be approaching its end. "The legal part will be over soon," Hector confirmed, pulling her into his arms with the protective tenderness that had become second nature. "But the best part, building our life together, raising our daughter, creating the family we both want, that's just beginning." "Our daughter," Lisa repeated wonderingly, placing both their hands on her belly where Isabella Rose was settling down for the night. "Our daughter," Hector confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss to Lisa's forehead. "Isabella Rose Gonzalez, who's going to grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and protected by parents who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe." Outside their windows, Colin McLean was probably planning his next move, unaware that his own surveillance activities had finally provided the evidence needed to destroy him legally. But inside Hector's kitchen, surrounded by the warmth of domestic love and shared dreams, Lisa felt truly safe for the first time since December. Their war with Colin was approaching its final battle, but the most important victory had already been won. They had found each other, fallen in love under the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and built something strong enough to withstand any storm. Tomorrow would bring criminal charges, legal proceedings, and the beginning of the end for Colin McLean's reign of terror. But tonight was about celebrating the family they had created through courage, love, and the unshakable faith that good could triumph over evil when people were brave enough to fight for what mattered most. As they made love that night with the gentle care required by Lisa's advancing pregnancy, both of them whispered promises to their daughter and to each other, promises of protection, love, and a future filled with all the happiness they had fought so hard to claim. Chapter 6: Family Fortress. Building allies. The phone call came on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after Lisa had begun living under Liam Rodriguez's security protection, while she was making breakfast in Hector's sun-drenched kitchen. At 19 weeks pregnant, her condition was now impossible to hide, and the domestic routine they had developed felt not just natural, but essential to her emotional healing. The simple act of cooking eggs while Hector read architectural journals at the kitchen island had become a treasured ritual that represented everything normal and safe about their growing relationship. But when her phone rang and her mother's name appeared on the screen, Lisa's newfound peace cracked like ice under pressure. "You should answer," Hector said gently, setting down his coffee and moving to stand behind her with the kind of automatic support that had become their natural language. "Your mother deserves to know what's happening in your life, especially now." "She's going to have questions I'm not ready to answer completely," Lisa whispered, staring at the still ringing phone. "About the timing, about why I've been so distant for months, about why I'm suddenly living with someone she's never met." "Then we'll answer what you're comfortable sharing and redirect the rest," Hector replied, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. But hiding from family during a crisis usually makes things more complicated, not less. Lisa accepted the call with trembling fingers, knowing that this conversation would fundamentally change her relationship with her mother. "Hi, Mama." Lisa Evangeline Abbott. Carmen's voice carried the particular tone that had made both her children confess their secrets since childhood. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain why Mrs. Patterson from church mentioned seeing you at the grocery store last week, very obviously pregnant, with a man she didn't recognize, and why you haven't returned my calls for the past month." Lisa closed her eyes, drawing strength from Hector's presence and the knowledge that she no longer had to face difficult conversations alone. "Mama, I know I owe you explanations. Could you come for dinner this weekend? I have someone very important I want you to meet, and there are things we need to discuss in person." "Come where for dinner?" Carmen's voice carried the sharp edge of a mother who sensed major life changes happening without her knowledge. "Your apartment barely has space for 2 people, much less dinner guests." I'm staying somewhere else right now," Lisa said carefully. "Somewhere safer, with someone who's been helping me through a difficult situation." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Lisa to wonder if the call had dropped. Difficult situation. Carmen's voice had shifted from interrogation to maternal concern. "Lisa, honey, what kind of trouble are you in? And why didn't you come to me for help?" "Because this kind of trouble requires resources and expertise I couldn't ask you to provide," Lisa replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "But I'm safe now, Mama. I'm protected and cared for, and I want you to meet the man who made that possible." "And the pregnancy?" Lisa's breath caught, but Hector's hand on her shoulder anchored her courage. 19 weeks along, due in early spring. And before you start counting months and asking questions, yes, the situation is complicated. But the baby is wanted and loved and will be raised by people who will protect her with their lives. Another long silence then. "Her?" "Isabella Rose," Lisa said softly, her free hand moving to her belly where their daughter was performing morning exercises. "Isabella Rose Gonzalez, if—" She caught herself before revealing marriage plans that hadn't been finalized. "Gonzalez?" Carmen's voice carried surprise and something that might have been relief. "Mexican family." "Yes, and Mama, he's everything good in the world, everything I never thought I'd be lucky enough to find." "I want to meet him," Carmen said with the decisiveness that had guided her family through every crisis. "Tonight. I'm not waiting until the weekend to understand what's happening with my daughter. Tonight might be—" "Tonight," Carmen interrupted with finality. "And bring Liam too. If you're building a new family, I want your brother to meet the man who's claiming that responsibility." After the call ended, Lisa leaned against Hector with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "She's coming tonight," she said. "With Liam. She's not the kind of person who waits patiently when her children are in crisis." "Good," Hector replied with genuine appreciation. "I want to meet the woman who raised you to be so strong." That evening, as Carmen and Liam Abbott walked through Hector's front door, Lisa felt her stomach perform gymnastics that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Carmen Abbott was a formidable woman who had worked her way from staff nurse to hospital chief administrator while raising 2 children alone, and she possessed the kind of maternal radar that could detect deception from 3 states away. Liam, now finishing his doctoral degree in social work, took one look around Hector's elegant home and whistled under his breath. "Damn, sis. When you said he was an architect, you didn't mention he was successful enough to live in Architectural Digest." "Liam," Carmen warned automatically, but Lisa could see her mother's eyes cataloging the obvious signs of wealth and achievement. "Mrs. Abbott," Hector said, approaching with the kind of respectful confidence that mothers recognized instinctively, "I'm Hector Gonzalez, Thank you for agreeing to meet me under circumstances that I know must seem sudden and concerning." Carmen studied Hector's face with the analytical intensity she had perfected during decades of evaluating character under pressure. "Call me Carmen," she said finally, "and you can start earning my approval by explaining how my daughter went from being a single nurse to a pregnant woman living in a mansion with someone I've never heard of." Over dinner, a careful fusion of Mexican and Southern comfort food that Hector and Lisa had prepared together, the story gradually emerged. Not the complete truth about Colin's assault. Lisa wasn't emotionally prepared to burden her family with those details, but enough truth to explain the urgency, the protection protocols, and the absolute certainty that they belonged together despite the compressed timeline. "So you're telling me," Liam said, helping himself to more of Hector's mole while studying his sister's face for signs of whatever she wasn't revealing, "that you two fell in love and decided to start a family together, all in the span of 2 months." "We fell in love," Hector corrected gently, his hand finding Lisa's across the table. "The family part was Lisa's decision and my privilege to support." Carmen's sharp eyes caught the careful phrasing. "Whose baby is this, really?" The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. Lisa felt panic rise in her throat, but Hector's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Mine," he said with absolute conviction. "Isabella Rose is my daughter in every way that matters. I've been to every doctor's appointment. I talk to her every night. I've built her nursery with my own hands. Biology is irrelevant when it comes to love and commitment." "But there is a biological father," Carmen pressed with the persistence of a mother who sensed important information being withheld. "There's a sperm donor," Hector replied with controlled precision. "Someone who will have no role in Isabella's life or Lisa's future. Someone who's being handled through appropriate legal channels." Carmen's expression suggested she understood more than she was saying. 25 years in hospital administration had taught her to recognize the signs of domestic violence, sexual assault, and the kind of legal complications that required professional security and legal teams. "This legal situation," she said carefully, "is it the reason for all the security measures I noticed on the way in? The cameras, the gate system, the fact that you seem to have professional protection protocols in place." "Yes," Lisa said quietly, grateful that her mother's experience allowed her to understand without requiring explicit details. "The situation required professional intervention." "And you," Carmen said, turning her full attention to Hector, "you're willing to take on not just a pregnant woman and her baby, but also whatever legal and safety complications come with protecting them." "I'm not taking on anything," Hector replied with gentle firmness. "I'm gaining everything I've ever wanted. A family worth protecting, a woman worth loving, a daughter worth raising. The complications aren't burdens. They're just obstacles to overcome." Liam, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics, leaned forward with the directness that characterized their sibling relationship. "Lisa, are you happy?" he asked simply. "I mean genuinely, deeply happy for the first time in months, because you look different than you have since Dad died. You look peaceful." Lisa felt tears spring to her eyes at her brother's perception. "Yes," she said simply, "for the first time in a very long time, I'm genuinely happy." "Then that's all I need to know," Liam replied, raising his glass in a toast. "To my sister finding someone who makes her smile again, and to my future niece who's going to be spoiled rotten by her Uncle Liam." Carmen continued studying Hector throughout the evening, watching how he anticipated Lisa's needs, how he spoke about their future with such certainty, how his hand moved protectively to Lisa's belly whenever Isabella kicked. As they were preparing to leave, Carmen pulled Lisa aside for a private conversation. "I don't know all the details," she said quietly, "and I understand why you're not ready to share them. but I want you to know that whatever happened, whatever you survived, I'm proud of how you're handling it. And that man loves you with everything he has. Anyone can see it." "I know," Lisa replied, tears threatening again. "Mama, I never thought I'd find someone who would love me and the baby unconditionally. I never thought I'd feel safe again." "You do now?" Carmen asked, her maternal instincts focused entirely on her daughter's emotional well-being. "Completely," Lisa confirmed. "For the first time in months, I sleep through the night without nightmares. I wake up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. Hector makes me feel cherished and protected, and like I deserve all the happiness in the world." Carmen hugged her daughter with the fierce protectiveness that had guided their family through every crisis. "Then he has my blessing, my support, and my gratitude for giving me back my happy daughter." As Carmen and Liam drove away that evening, they left behind a family that was stronger for having been tested and approved by the people who mattered most to Lisa. "Your mother is incredible," Hector said as they watched the taillights disappear down their private road. "I understand now where you get your strength and your courage." "She likes you," Lisa replied with wonder and relief. "I was so afraid she'd think this was all too fast, too complicated, too risky." Carmen Abbott understands that sometimes life doesn't follow conventional timelines, Hector said, pulling Lisa into his arms. "And she can see that what we have is real, regardless of how quickly it developed." That night, as they settled into bed with Isabella Rose performing her evening acrobatics between them, Lisa felt a completeness she hadn't experienced since childhood. She had her chosen family's approval, her biological family's support, and a future that promised everything she had ever dreamed of, but never dared hope she might actually receive. The legal battle with Colin was approaching its climax, but the most important victory had already been won. She had people who loved her unconditionally, protected her fiercely, and would stand beside her through whatever challenges remained. Family, Lisa was learning, wasn't just about shared genetics. It was about shared commitment, shared love, and the unshakable promise to protect each other through every storm life could devise. And she had never felt more grateful to be part of a family worth fighting for. Chapter 7. The Proposal of Promise. Love's Ultimate Declaration. 8 weeks had passed since Carmen Abbott's dinner visit, and Lisa was finally beginning to believe that their carefully constructed fortress might actually prove strong enough to withstand Colin McLean's sophisticated campaign of psychological terrorism. At 27 weeks pregnant, Isabella Rose was becoming increasingly active, and Lisa glowed with the kind of health and happiness that came from being cherished and protected by the man she loved more than life itself. Hector had been working with unusual intensity lately, taking mysterious phone calls in Spanish and spending long hours at what he claimed were priority construction sites requiring personal oversight. Lisa suspected he was planning something significant, the way he smiled when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he checked his watch as if counting down to something wonderful, the way he seemed to vibrate with barely contained excitement. "I have something to show you," he announced on a Friday evening as Lisa finished her shift at the hospital, his dark eyes sparkling with anticipation. "But it requires a short drive, and you'll have to trust me about the destination." "Somewhere safe?" Lisa asked automatically, her hand moving to her belly where Isabella was performing her evening gymnastics routine. Although Colin had been forced into more subtle harassment tactics since Elena's legal team had begun building their case, Lisa still felt vulnerable whenever she left the security of Hector's home. "The safest place we could possibly go," Hector promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "Somewhere that represents our future together." The drive took them into the hills outside the city, past rolling estates and established neighborhoods, until Hector turned onto a gravel road marked with construction signs and permits bearing his company's logo. At the end of the winding drive, Lisa gasped at the sight that awaited them. Before them stood the foundation and framing of what would obviously become a magnificent home. Soaring roof lines that seemed designed to capture every ray of sunlight, expansive window openings that would frame the valley views, covered terraces that overlooked areas marked for future gardens. But more than just impressive architecture, the structure felt warm and welcoming even in its skeletal state, as if it had been designed specifically for the kind of love and family that Lisa had always dreamed of. "Hector," she breathed, stepping carefully out of his truck and staring at the construction site in wonder. "What is this place?" "This," he said, taking her hand and leading her along the marked walkways that would eventually become interior corridors, "is home. Our home. I started the design process about 6 weeks ago, after I realized that what I felt for you and Isabella wasn't going away or changing. It was only getting stronger." Lisa's eyes filled with tears as they walked through the framed-out spaces, Hector pointing out architectural details with the passion of someone who had poured his heart into every design decision. The kitchen would have windows overlooking the children's play area, his office would be positioned to provide security oversight while maintaining privacy for client calls, and the master suite would feature a sitting area where they could watch sunrises together for decades to come. "You designed this for us?" Lisa asked, overwhelmed by the thought and planning that had gone into creating this sanctuary. "I designed it for the family we're building," Hector replied, his voice carrying the certainty that had become his signature response to questions about their future. "For Isabella Rose and for the other children we'll have together, and for the life we're going to share." But it was when they reached the framed area that would become the nursery that Lisa's heart nearly stopped with emotion. The space was further along than the rest of the construction, with subflooring installed and electrical work roughed in. The room's orientation would provide gentle morning light, and the window placements were positioned to offer views of the garden areas where Hector had already marked spaces for safe play equipment. "Isabella's room," Hector said softly, his hands moving to rest on Lisa's belly where their daughter was responding to the excitement in her parents' voices. "I wanted to show you this space first, so you could help me finalize the details before we move forward with interior finishing." "You're really building this for us," Lisa whispered, unable to fully process the magnitude of what he was offering. "I would build you 1,000 homes if it meant providing the security and happiness you deserve," Hector replied, turning her to face him with gentle hands. "I would design entire cities if it meant creating the perfect environment for our family." As the sun began to set behind the hills, painting the construction site in golden light that made everything seem magical, Hector led Lisa to the center of what would become Isabella's nursery. That's when she noticed them. Rose petals scattered across the plywood subfloor, creating a heart shape that filled the space with incredible fragrance. Battery-powered lanterns placed around the room's perimeter cast dancing shadows on the framed walls. "Hector," she began, but he was already dropping to one knee in the center of their daughter's future room, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Lisa Evangeline Abbott," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up at her with eyes that held his entire soul. "6 months ago, I was a successful man who had built impressive buildings but had never really built a home. Then you walked into my life and taught me the difference between constructing structures and creating sanctuary, between achieving success and finding meaning, between having everything and having everything that actually matters." Lisa's tears were flowing freely now, her hands pressed to her mouth as she listened to words more beautiful than any she had ever imagined hearing. "You've survived trauma that would have destroyed a lesser person," Hector continued, his own voice breaking with emotion. "And instead of letting it make you bitter or afraid, you've used it to become more compassionate, more determined, more courageously loving than anyone has a right to be. You're carrying our miracle daughter. You're healing from wounds that run deeper than most people can imagine. And you're still somehow finding room in your heart to love me the way I've always dreamed of being loved." He opened the velvet box with reverent care, revealing a ring that took Lisa's breath away. It was clearly custom designed, a stunning sapphire center stone surrounded by diamonds, with intricate metalwork that seemed to capture and hold the lantern light. "The sapphire matches your eyes when you're truly happy," Hector explained, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "The diamonds represent every day we'll spend together building something beautiful. But more than jewelry, Lisa, this ring is a promise that no one will ever hurt you again, that Isabella Rose will grow up surrounded by love and safety, that we'll build a family strong enough to weather any storm." "Hector ... Lisa whispered, but he continued speaking his heart. "Marry me, Lisa. Let me give you and Isabella the protection of my name, the security of my resources, the promise of my absolute devotion. Let me be the father our daughter deserves, and the husband you never thought you'd be brave enough to trust again. Let me love you both for the rest of my life." "Yes," Lisa sobbed, dropping to her knees beside him in the rose petals, her answer coming from the deepest part of her healed heart. Yes, absolutely yes. I love you so much, Hector. I love the man you are, the father you're already becoming, the way you make me believe in happily ever after again." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, because of course it did. Hector had spent weeks working with the jeweler to ensure every detail would be exactly right for this moment. Their kiss in the candlelit nursery was passionate and tender, and full of promises for the future they would build together. Isabella Rose moved enthusiastically between them, as if their daughter was celebrating her parents' engagement with joyful acrobatics. "She approves," Lisa laughed through her tears of joy, placing Hector's hand where their daughter was most active. "Of course she does," Hector replied, his own eyes bright with emotional tears. "She knows her mama just said yes to marrying the man who's going to spend the rest of his life making sure nothing bad ever happens to either of you." As they sat together in their future daughter's room, surrounded by rose petals and battery-powered romance, planning a wedding and a lifetime and all the beautiful details that would fill the spaces between, neither of them noticed the telescope lens reflecting moonlight from the ridge beyond the construction site's security perimeter. Colin McLean had found their sanctuary through the kind of persistent surveillance that wealth could purchase from unscrupulous private investigators. But his ability to document their happiness would soon become evidence in his own prosecution, as Liam Rodriguez's counter-surveillance team was already photographing the watchers. For now, though, Lisa and Hector were lost in each other and the future they were designing together. A future strong enough to withstand any storm, including the final desperate assault that Colin was even now planning from his position of increasing legal jeopardy. "When?" Lisa asked as they finally prepared to leave the construction site, her engagement ring catching the lantern light like captured starlight. "Whenever you're ready," Hector replied immediately. "Tomorrow if you want, 6 months from now if you need time to plan the perfect celebration. Whatever makes you happiest." "Soon," Lisa decided, her hand resting on Isabella's gentle movements. "I want to be your wife before she's born. I want Isabella Rose to come into the world with married parents who chose each other and chose her." "Soon it is," Hector agreed, sealing their promise with another kiss that tasted like forever and felt like coming home after a lifetime of searching. As they drove back toward the city, leaving behind the foundation of their future home, Lisa looked back through the truck's rear window at the construction site that would shelter their growing family. Colin McLean could watch from the shadows and plot his final desperate moves, but he could never touch what they had created together. Their love was a fortress stronger than any building Hector had ever designed, and it would protect them through whatever battles remained. The war was approaching its end, but the most important victory had already been won. They had found each other, fallen in love under impossible circumstances, and built something precious enough to defend with their lives. Their wedding planning could begin tomorrow, but their real marriage, the joining of hearts and souls and shared dreams, had already happened in a half-built nursery surrounded by rose petals and promises of forever. Chapter 8. Racing Against Time, Wedding as Protection. The marriage license office possessed an unexpectedly romantic atmosphere for a government facility, with high, coffered ceilings and tall windows that filled the space with golden afternoon light. Lisa, now 29 weeks pregnant and radiant, despite the underlying stress of their ongoing legal battle, held Hector's hand as they completed the paperwork that would legally bind their lives together in just 72 hours. Expedited processing approved due to pregnancy status and documented domestic violence concerns, the clerk announced, stamping their application with official authority. Your marriage license will be valid starting Monday. Congratulations, and I hope you have a beautiful ceremony. Thank you, Lisa said softly, her engagement ring catching the late October sunlight. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Lisa Gonzalez, and Isabella Rose would be born into the legal protection of Hector's name and resources. But their moment of anticipated joy was interrupted when Elena Martinez called as they left the municipal building. Colin's legal team just filed an emergency motion for paternity determination and custody evaluation. Elena's voice carried controlled fury through the phone speaker. They're demanding immediate DNA testing and temporary custody arrangements pending full biological confirmation. Hector's jaw tightened as he helped Lisa into his truck. How is that possible? We haven't even announced the pregnancy publicly. Hospital staff, Elena replied grimly. Someone in the medical records department sold information to Colin's private investigators. We have evidence of the bribery, but the damage is done. Colin now has official confirmation of the pregnancy timeline and due date. Lisa felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. What does this mean for our wedding? Legally, nothing. You can still marry on Monday as planned. But Colin's team is arguing that any marriage at this point constitutes fraud designed to deny him paternal rights. They want emergency hearings before the wedding can take place. Can they get them? Hector asked, his mind already calculating alternatives and protective strategies. Judge Williams is reviewing the motion over the weekend. We'll know Monday morning whether we're dealing with an immediate court battle or whether we have more time to prepare our defense. That evening, as they worked together in Hector's kitchen, preparing what might be their last quiet dinner before legal warfare consumed their lives, Lisa couldn't shake the stress of Colin's latest assault on their happiness. I keep thinking about what Elena said, she admitted, setting down her knife and turning to face Hector. About this being fraud if we marry now. What if they're right? What if we're rushing into this for legal protection rather than love? Hector stopped his own food preparation and gave her his complete attention. Do you feel like we're rushing? No, Lisa said immediately. That's what scares me. This doesn't feel rushed at all. It feels like the most natural thing in the world, like we've been building toward this moment since we met. But what if that's just because we've been in crisis mode for so long? Lisa, Hector said, moving to frame her face with gentle hands, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Yes, we're getting married sooner than we might have under normal circumstances. Yes, there are legal advantages to being married when Isabella is born, but that's not why I proposed to you in our daughter's nursery. Then why? She whispered, needing to hear his reasoning again. Because I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you, Hector replied with the certainty that had become his signature response to doubt. Because when I wake up next to you, I feel like the luckiest man alive. Because when Isabella kicks, I think that's my daughter, not because of legal documents, but because my heart claimed both of you months ago, Because I want to be your husband, not for legal protection, but because I can't imagine any other life." As if responding to her father's declaration, Isabella performed an enthusiastic series of kicks that made them both smile through their serious conversation. "She agrees," Lisa said, placing both their hands on her belly where their daughter was celebrating. "She knows love when she feels it," Hector replied, pressing a gentle kiss to Lisa's forehead. "And so do you." Monday morning brought both their marriage license activation and Judge Williams' ruling on Colin's emergency motion. Elena called at 7 a.m. with the verdict. "Good news and challenging news," she announced without preamble. Judge Williams denied the emergency custody motion, ruling that Colin has no standing to claim parental rights until after the birth and proper paternity testing. However, she did order DNA testing to be conducted immediately after Isabella's birth, with results to be provided to all parties within 6 weeks of delivery. 6 weeks? Lisa asked. That seems fast for DNA testing. The court can expedite when custody issues are involved, Elena explained. But here's the crucial part. Judge Williams also ruled that any marriage occurring before the baby's birth is legally valid and cannot be challenged on fraud grounds, provided both parties enter it freely and with full understanding of the circumstances. "So we can marry today as planned?" Hector asked. "You can and should marry today as planned," Elena confirmed. "Once you're legally married, Hector has presumptive father rights that make any custody challenge much more difficult, even if Colin proves biological paternity." The courthouse wedding was small but perfect. Elena and her husband as witnesses, Carmen and Liam providing family support, and a judge who understood the legal significance of what they were accomplishing. Lisa wore a simple but elegant dress that accommodated her pregnancy, and Hector couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the brief ceremony. "Do you, Hector Alejandro Gonzalez, take Lisa Evangeline Abbott to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish, to protect and honor, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Hector said, his voice strong and clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I promise to love Lisa and our children with everything I am for the rest of my life. I promise to be the father Isabella Rose deserves and the husband Lisa never thought she'd be brave enough to trust. I promise to build our family a foundation so strong that nothing will ever shake it." "And do you, Lisa Evangeline Abbott, take Hector Alejandro Gonzalez to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Lisa replied through tears of joy that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. "I promise to love you with all the courage you've taught me I possess. I promise to trust in the future we're building together. I promise to be the wife and mother our family deserves, and to never forget that love is stronger than fear." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by Isabella Rose's most enthusiastic movements yet, as if their daughter was celebrating her parents' marriage from her safe haven inside her mother's womb. "I now present Mr. and Mrs. Hector Gonzalez," the judge announced to gentle applause from their small gathering. That evening, as they celebrated their marriage with a quiet dinner at home, Colin McLean was served with updated legal documents reflecting Lisa's new marital status and Hector's presumptive parental rights. According to Liam Rodriguez's surveillance team, Colin's reaction involved significant property damage to his own office and several hours of consultation with increasingly expensive attorneys. "He's getting desperate," Elena reported during their evening debriefing call. "Desperate men make stupid mistakes, which is good for our criminal case against him." "How much longer before this is over?" Lisa asked, exhaustion evident in her voice despite the joy of their wedding day. 3 more weeks until we have enough evidence to file criminal charges that will stick," Elena replied. 6 weeks after Isabella's birth for the DNA results and final custody determination. But the hardest part is behind us now. You're legally protected as a married couple, and any child born to your marriage is presumptively Hector's regardless of biology. As they settled into bed that night as husband and wife, with Isabella Rose performing her nightly acrobatics between them, Lisa felt a completeness that transcended legal protection or strategic advantage. "Mrs. Gonzalez," Hector murmured against her hair, his hand resting on their daughter's movements. "I like the sound of that," Lisa replied, twisting her new wedding ring, a simple platinum band that complemented her engagement ring perfectly. "Isabella Rose Gonzalez," Hector continued, his voice filled with wonder. "Our daughter, born into love and legal protection, and everything we can possibly give her." "Our daughter," Lisa agreed, placing her hand over his on her belly. "No matter what DNA tests say, no matter what Colin tries to claim, she's ours because we choose her and love her and will protect her with our lives." Outside their bedroom windows, the city sparkled with possibilities for their future. Colin McLean might still pose a threat, but he was fighting a losing battle against the legal and emotional fortress they had built together. Their wedding night was tender and passionate within the safe boundaries of late pregnancy, a celebration of their commitment that looked forward to decades of similar nights, filled with love, security, and the knowledge that they had found each other against impossible odds. The war was approaching its final phase, but the most important victory had already been won. They were now legally and spiritually united, with a daughter on the way, and a love strong enough to overcome whatever challenges remained. Isabella Rose Gonzalez would be born into a family that had been tested by the worst kind of evil and had emerged stronger, more committed, and absolutely unshakable in their devotion to each other. The future had never looked brighter, even with storm clouds still gathering on the horizon. Chapter 9: Crisis and Courage, when love faces the ultimate test. At 35 weeks pregnant, Lisa had entered the final phase of her pregnancy with a mixture of anticipation and lingering anxiety about the legal battles that would inevitably follow Isabella Rose's birth. 2 months had passed since her marriage to Hector, and while their domestic happiness had deepened with each passing day, the shadow of Colin McLean's legal challenges continued to loom over their future. The breakthrough in their case came not from court proceedings or DNA testing, but from an unexpected source: Colin McLean's own arrogance and escalating desperation. "We got him," Elena Martinez announced during their weekly legal consultation, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered dangerous prey. "Colin made the catastrophic mistake of attempting to bribe Judge Williams' clerk for advance information about court scheduling and custody determination procedures." Lisa and Hector exchanged glances across Elena's conference table, hope and disbelief warring in their expressions. "Bribery of court personnel is a federal crime," Elena continued, spreading documents across the table that detailed months of investigation and surveillance. But, more importantly, Colin's approach to the clerk was recorded by FBI surveillance equipment that had been installed as part of a separate corruption investigation. "The FBI was already investigating Colin?" Hector asked, his architectural mind automatically cataloging the implications of such extensive federal involvement. Not Colin specifically, but the broader network of wealthy individuals who use bribery and intimidation to manipulate court proceedings, Elena explained. Colin walked directly into an ongoing federal sting operation. Lisa felt a flutter of hope in her chest that had nothing to do with Isabella's movements. "What does this mean for us?" "It means that federal prosecutors are now interested in Colin's entire pattern of behavior, including his harassment campaign against you," Elena replied with obvious satisfaction. "They want to use his case as an example of how wealthy predators exploit the legal system to continue victimizing their targets." Over the following 3 weeks, as Lisa's pregnancy entered its final stages, the legal landscape shifted dramatically in their favor. Federal investigators interviewed the other women Carmen had identified, each of whom provided testimony about Colin's systematic pattern of assault, intimidation, and legal manipulation. More importantly, the FBI's investigation revealed that Colin had been using his network of private investigators not just to harass Lisa, but to gather information for blackmailing other potential victims and their families. He's been running what amounts to a criminal enterprise, Elena reported during what would be their final pre-birth legal meeting. Sexual assault, witness intimidation, bribery, conspiracy. The federal charges are extensive enough to result in decades in prison. When will they arrest him? Hector asked, his protective instincts focused entirely on ensuring Lisa could give birth in peace. They're waiting until after Isabella is born and the DNA testing is complete, Elena replied. Federal prosecutors want to demonstrate that Colin's paternal rights claims were always part of his intimidation strategy rather than legitimate parental interest. At 38 weeks pregnant, Lisa went into labor on a Tuesday morning that dawned clear and bright with promises of new beginnings. Hector had been monitoring her contractions since midnight, timing them with the precision he brought to construction schedules, and by 6 a.m. they were regular enough to warrant the trip to the hospital. "Are you ready to meet our daughter?" Hector asked as they walked slowly through the hospital corridors toward the maternity ward, his arms supporting Lisa through each contraction. "I've been ready for months," Lisa replied, her face glowing with anticipation despite the pain. "I want to hold her, see her face, know that she's finally safe in our arms." Isabella Rose Gonzalez was born at 2:47 p.m. after 8 hours of labor that Lisa later described as difficult but manageable with the right partner holding your hand. Hector cut the umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face and was the first person to hold their daughter after the medical team confirmed she was healthy and perfect. "Hello, mi amor," he whispered to the tiny, perfect baby who had been the center of their world for months. "Welcome to your life. Your mama and I have been waiting so long to meet you." Lisa watched her husband cradle their daughter with reverent tenderness and felt a completeness that transcended everything they had endured to reach this moment. "She's beautiful," she breathed, studying Isabella's perfect features, dark hair like her father's, long fingers that would someday build and create, and an expression of serene contentment that suggested she felt completely safe in her parents' arms. "She's perfect," Hector agreed, carefully transferring Isabella to Lisa's waiting arms. "And she's ours, completely, legally, eternally ours." The court-ordered DNA testing was conducted 24 hours after Isabella's birth, with samples collected by court-appointed medical personnel and processed by the state's forensic laboratory. The results, delivered 6 weeks later, confirmed what everyone already knew. Colin McLean was Isabella's biological father, but by the time those results arrived, they were legally meaningless. 2 days after Isabella's birth, federal agents arrested Colin McLean at his office on charges of bribery, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and racketeering. The arrest was coordinated with simultaneous raids on his private investigators' offices and the seizure of financial records documenting years of systematic victim intimidation. Federal conviction on these charges carries a mandatory minimum of 15 years in prison, Elena explained during their post-arrest consultation. But more importantly for your family, federal felony conviction automatically terminates any parental rights claims under state family law. Lisa, nursing 6-week-old Isabella in Elena's office, felt the last chains of fear fall away from her heart. "He can never claim her? Never try to take her from us?" "Never," Elena confirmed with absolute certainty. "The federal conviction makes it legally impossible for Colin to claim any rights or relationship with Isabella. Hector's adoption petition will be automatically approved, making him Isabella's legal father in every sense. At Isabella's 2-month pediatric appointment, Dr. Mason asked the routine question about family medical history. "Father's information?" she inquired, pen poised over Isabella's chart. "Hector Alejandro Gonzalez," Lisa replied without hesitation. "He's her father." Dr. Mason noted the information and moved on to the next routine question, never knowing that she had just documented the completion of a legal and emotional journey that had transformed 3 separate lives into one unbreakable family. That evening, as they celebrated Isabella's healthy checkup with a quiet dinner at home, local news reported Colin McLean's federal conviction and sentencing to 18 years in prison without possibility of parole. "It's really over," Lisa said wonderingly, watching Hector feed Isabella her evening bottle with the practiced expertise of a devoted father. "The legal part is over," Hector confirmed, his attention focused on their daughter's contented suckling. "But the best part, raising Isabella, building our family, growing old together, that's just beginning." "Our family," Lisa repeated, the words carrying wonder and gratitude and absolute contentment. As Isabella drifted off to sleep in her father's arms, surrounded by the warmth and security of the home they had built together, Lisa reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect peace. Colin McLean was gone, removed from their lives permanently through the justice system they had learned to trust. Isabella Rose Gonzalez would grow up knowing only love, protection, and the unshakable security of parents who had fought every battle necessary to ensure her safety. And Lisa had discovered that healing was possible from even the deepest trauma when you found the right person to help you rebuild from love instead of fear. Their war was won, their family was complete, and their future stretched ahead of them, filled with all the ordinary miracles that made life worth living. Bedtime stories and first steps, school plays and teenage heartbreaks, graduations and weddings, and grandchildren who would carry their love into generations yet to come. Isabella Rose stirred in her father's arms, her tiny hand grasping his finger with instinctive trust. And both her parents smiled with the knowledge that they had given her the greatest gift possible, a life built on love rather than violence, protection rather than fear, hope rather than despair. The darkness was behind them now, and ahead lay only light. Chapter 10. Wedding Day Victory. Love's Ultimate Triumph. 6 months after Isabella Rose Gonzalez was born, healthy and perfect into her parents' waiting arms, Lisa and Hector finally had the wedding celebration they had always dreamed of. Their courthouse marriage had been a necessity for legal protection, but now, with Colin McLean serving 18 years in federal prison and all threats permanently eliminated, they could celebrate their love surrounded by everyone who mattered. "Today we celebrate not just our marriage, but our complete victory," Hector said as he adjusted his formal suit, watching through their bedroom window as wedding planners transformed their back garden into a romantic paradise. "Colin is gone forever, Isabella is legally mine in every way, and we're finally free to build our future without looking over our shoulders." Lisa, radiant in a flowing wedding dress that she had chosen without any time pressure or safety concerns, nursed 6-month-old Isabella in their bedroom while getting ready for the celebration that would officially mark the end of their ordeal and the beginning of their happily ever after. "She's so beautiful, mi amor," Hector said, sitting beside them and stroking Isabella's dark hair as she contentedly nursed. "Our perfect daughter, born into love and safety, never to know the fear we once carried." "Our perfect family," Lisa agreed, looking down at Isabella's peaceful face. "And soon, we'll give her a little brother or sister to play with." At 3 months pregnant with their second child, this one conceived in complete joy and security, Lisa glowed with the kind of happiness that came from knowing every dream had come true. The garden ceremony was everything they had imagined during their darkest days. White roses and baby's breath creating a romantic canopy. Family and friends gathered to celebrate love's triumph over evil, and Isabella rose, gurgling happily in Carmen's arms as her parents renewed the vows they had first spoken in a courthouse under very different circumstances. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying joy and celebration rather than the urgent necessity that had marked their first ceremony. "We gather today not to witness the beginning of Lisa and Hector's marriage, but to celebrate the beautiful life they have built together through courage, love, and unshakable faith in each other." Liam served as best man, while Carmen held Isabella during the ceremony. Elena Martinez and her family sat in the front row, representing the legal victory that had made this peaceful celebration possible. Dr. Mason and the nursing staff who had supported Lisa through everything occupied places of honor, along with the security team that had become extended family. But the most honored guest was Judge Patricia Williams, who had not only presided over Colin's criminal trial, but had personally expedited Hector's adoption of Isabella. "6 months ago, I sentenced Colin McLean to 18 years in federal prison," Judge Williams said during the ceremony, having been invited to speak about justice and healing. "Today I have the honor of witnessing the family he tried to destroy, celebrating the love that ultimately defeated him. This is why we fight for justice, not just to punish evil, but to protect the good that evil tries to destroy." When Lisa and Hector renewed their vows, their words carried the weight of everything they had survived and overcome. "I, Hector, take you, Lisa, not just as my wife but as my partner in building something beautiful from ashes," Hector said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise you that our children will know only love, that our home will always be safe, and that every day for the rest of our lives will be better than the day before, because we face it together. I, Lisa, take you, Hector, as my husband, my protector, my best friend and the father of our children," Lisa replied through tears of pure joy. "You saved me when I thought I couldn't be saved. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable, and you gave me a family when I thought I would face the future alone. I love you forever." When they kissed to seal their renewed vows, Isabella clapped her tiny hands from Carmen's arms, making everyone laugh with delight at their daughter's perfect timing. The reception continued into the evening, with toasts that celebrated not just their marriage, but their victory over the forces that had tried to tear them apart. "To my daughter and son-in-law," Carmen said, raising her glass with tears of happiness, "who proved that love really can conquer hate, that good really can triumph over evil, and that families built on choice and commitment are stronger than anything the world can throw at them. To Tia Lisa and Tio Hector, Aunt Lisa and Uncle Hector," Liam added, "who showed me that the best revenge against people who try to destroy you is building something so beautiful that their efforts become completely irrelevant." As the evening wound down and guests departed with hearts full of joy and hope, Hector and Lisa found themselves alone in their garden with Isabella, who had fallen asleep in her father's arms, surrounded by the flowers and lights that marked their celebration. "It's really over," Lisa said wonderingly, her hand resting on her belly where their second baby was growing in an environment of complete peace and security. "The legal battles, the fear, the constant looking over our shoulders, it's all really behind us." "The war is over," Hector confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss to both his wife's forehead and his daughter's sleeping head. "Now comes the best part, raising our children, growing old together, and proving every day that love was worth fighting for." That night, as they made love in their master bedroom with Isabella sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby, both of them whispered promises to their sleeping daughter and their growing baby. Promises of protection, love, and a future filled with all the ordinary miracles that made life precious. 2 years later, as they stood in the same garden, watching Isabella Rose take her first independent steps toward her baby brother, Diego Gabriel, who was laughing from his blanket on the grass, Lisa reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect domestic happiness. "Look, Diego," Isabella called to her baby brother as she toddled across the garden with determined concentration. "I'm walking." "Yes, princess," Hector laughed, ready to catch Isabella if she stumbled. "Show your little brother how strong and brave you are." Colin McLean had become nothing more than a cautionary tale told in legal circles, while the family he had tried to destroy had become a symbol of hope and healing for other survivors. Their story was featured in Elena's speeches about legal advocacy, in Liam's research about family resilience, and in the foundation they had established to help other assault survivors rebuild their lives. But for Lisa and Hector, it wasn't a story of triumph over adversity. It was simply life. Beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life lived with the people who mattered most and filled with love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "What are you thinking about, mi amor?" Hector asked, noticing Lisa's thoughtful expression as she watched their children play in the garden where they had celebrated their victory over evil. "How perfectly this turned out," Lisa replied, leaning into his arms with Isabella now napping against her shoulder and Diego gurgling contentedly in his father's embrace. "How every terrible thing that happened led us to exactly where we were supposed to be." "Destiny," Hector agreed, understanding that their love story had always been bigger than the circumstances that brought them together. "We were meant to find each other, meant to build this family, meant to prove that love always wins in the end." As the sun set over their garden, painting everything in golden light that made their happiness seem almost magical, Lisa and Hector knew with absolute certainty that they had built something eternal from temporary pain. Their love would last forever, and forever was exactly how long they planned to spend, proving that the most beautiful things in life were always worth fighting for. Their love conquered everything, and now they had eternity to enjoy the victory.